Hi, my name's Alex. I'm a filmmaker from Perth, Western Australia, and this is the first episode of just a little segment I've decided to call Finding Filmmaking, where I'll just give you a few little tips for people who want to learn a bit more about filmmaking, process, gear, all that kind of thing. So today what I wanted to talk about is choosing lenses. When you're starting out wanting to make films, you probably don't have a lot of money, so choosing the right lenses can be a tricky thing. There's a few things you want to consider. Now, I would recommend to almost anyone doing filmmaking to buy fast lenses. That's lenses with a wide aperture. The first reason for this is low light. With a lot of cameras, you'll struggle in low light if you don't have a lens with a wide aperture. There are some newer cameras where you can avoid this, particularly Sony brand ones, but usually the less you push your ISO, the better it's going to look. The other reason for this is for shallow depth of field. Now, I definitely don't believe that every film has to have shallow depth of field. It's very popular right now, but that doesn't mean that that's necessary for a film look. There are thousands and thousands of amazing films with beautiful cinematography that has deep depth of field, but it's always good to have that option there. So I'll mainly talk about this from an APS-C/full frame perspective. You can get micro four thirds lenses as well, but in my opinion, not that many of them are well suited for video, and you're probably better getting a speed booster and adapting it to APS-C lenses. In terms of getting primes versus zooms, generally, yes, primes will be better for filmmaking, but that's definitely not a hard and fast rule, and in fact I'm going to explain in a little bit something where that's very much not the case. What's more important than whether it's prime or zoom is how well it's suited to video, and these are things that have more to do with the mechanics of the lens and the optics. I mean, in terms of optics, I'd probably avoid most kit lenses, but there are so many great lenses out there for optics these days that you wouldn't have any trouble finding one. But one important aspect that's harder to find is the focus ring. You're going to be manually focusing in video. Yes, manual focus, please do that. Do not use autofocus unless you absolutely have to. And that means you really want to find a lens with a buttery smooth focus ring. Travel is important as well. Travel is how far around you rotate your focus ring before it goes from infinity to minimum focus or vice versa. And you'll find when you're doing manual focus that that's really important because you want to be able to focus on fine details and not have to worry about going too far because you just moved it a tiny amount. You know, it's just a pain in the ass, and you really want to be able to have a long travel on that. And like I said, the smoother it is, the better. Now, unless you're lucky enough to have a lot of money right off the bat, the chances are that you're going to be starting out with one or two lenses and then slowly expanding your kit till you've got a large range of lenses that can do everything you want to do. Now, I have this little concept, which is a bit of a personal rule that I think would be valuable for beginning filmmakers to follow, and I call that the 1.5 times rule, or 1.5 times rule. What this basically means is that in order to get a variety of focal lengths that will suit the different kind of angles that you want to be able to achieve with filmmaking, the most practical way to purchase your lenses is to go up in multiples of 1.5 for your focal length. This won't always be available exactly, but you can get a rough idea of that. So to get approximately 1.5 times, going from an ultra-wide angle up to heavy telephoto, this is what I'd recommend. 11mm, 16mm, 24mm, 35mm, 50mm, 85mm, and 135 or thereabouts. This is going off commonly available focal lengths. It's not exactly 1.5 times each time, but it should reach you a pretty close approximation. Obviously, most of you won't be able to afford all these at once, so for most people I'd recommend starting out investing in mid-range focal lengths. Something like 24, 35, then after that invest in a 50, and then maybe get a wide angle or telephoto. It all depends on what you prefer. Now again, I'm basing this off APS-C lenses because that's what I'm most familiar with, and that's a common standard for film and cinema and video production use. Now I have some specific lens recommendations which I think are great choices for pretty much any beginner filmmaker who has more than a very basic budget. The first lens I'd like to recommend is the Sigma Art 18-35 f1.8. You can get this lens in any of the common camera mounts. This is an example of a zoom which is perfectly suited to video. The only issues are very minor quibbles, like that it's not parfocal throughout the zoom range and it doesn't have hard infinity stops, but really those are things which you're not going to be worried about if you're a beginner filmmaker. It's still a lens that outperforms anything else in the price range for versatility, clarity, quality of optics, and suitability for video. Both the zoom and the focus rings are buttery smooth, absolutely amazing. It has a long focus throw. When it was released a few years ago, it was the fastest zoom lens ever made. So the Sigma 18-35 will set you back about $800 US, but basically it's 3 prime lenses in one, plus everything in between. 18mm, 24mm, 35mm, and any point in between, which makes it extremely versatile. And honestly, I use it for at least 80% of everything I shoot. It's just an extremely common focal range. Depending on the focal lengths that you prefer to shoot in, I'd recommend after that either getting an ultra wide or a 50mm. If you're getting a 50mm, there's lots of nifty 50s out there which are great. One I personally recommend is the Nikon 50mm 1.8 AI lens, which is an old lens from the 70s, also AIS, it doesn't matter, they're both about the same. Doesn't have any electronic communication with the camera, manual aperture and all that sort of thing, but when you're a filmmaker it's really important to learn these things. So I don't consider that a negative at all. It's beautiful. It's tack sharp, even wide open. The bokeh is creamy smooth. I love it. If you want to go the wide angle route, I would recommend one of 2 lenses. Firstly, the Rokinon 16mm f2 or t2.2, because they have a cinema range one as well, which is specifically designed to work with follow focuses, which is something that you'll probably end up using sooner or later. This is another lens which is beautifully sharp, looks great wide open, has a focus ring well suited to video, and about the fastest lens that you'll get in this kind of focal length, at least for anything at a reasonable price. The other option which you can go with if you're not quite as worried about having a fast aperture but still want it to be reasonably fast is the Tokina 11-16mm f2.8. Extremely fast lens. The focus ring isn't perfect, but because it's wide angle it doesn't matter as much, and being able to shoot in ultra wide 11mm is just amazing. Now some people are probably wondering about optical image stabilization. I honestly can't offer much insight on that because I've never used it. I've always just relied on other methods of stabilization or shooting handheld and not worrying about the fact that it looks like it's handheld. That's just my style and I don't think it's that important, but if it's important to you then obviously look into that. So all 3 of those lenses will probably end up costing you about $1,500 or so. If that's a bit above your budget, just start with something more basic, but those are definitely my recommendations. Those are lenses that will last you a long time and you'll never look back and think, oh geez, you know, I wish I'd invested in something a little better earlier on because now I have to, you know, buy cheap, buy twice, that kind of principle. But anyway, whatever you decide to do, I hope you found these tips helpful. If you'd like to see more of these in the future, subscribe to my channel and I'll make sure I keep uploading them. And also, please check out some of my films that I've made and let me know what you think. Bear in mind that these go all the way back to when I started, so they're not all the same quality. Thanks for watching and have a great day.